So, Pyrenean temples, the way of the stars. And I'm going to share with you some of the things that I've found in the area on both sides of the Pyrenees, but basically focusing on Catalonia, the northeastern section of Spain, Iberia. And who is this enigmatic woman on the cover? Our Lady of Elche, Spain, found near Alicante, and basically close to the coast of the Mediterranean. And she is an Iberian goddess that is very distinctive with these large ear whorls. And they remind me of a woman who hears the all. She's often related to the goddess Astarte. And the priestesses of Astarte were well-known astrologers. And they were the Phoenician, in the Phoenician temples. And they received the influence of the Babylonian star traditions as well as Egyptian. So many different cultures came into Iberia very early on, starting with the ancient mother goddess traditions, the Phoenicians, Greeks, Carthaginians, later Romans. So the ear wheels reminded me a bit of the ideal city that Plato wrote about. So here we have a simplified map of the main meridian that reaches from the north of France to the south, or Gaul, as it was called. And it was measured by the astronomers and scientists of the Paris Meridian, the Paris Observatory. But they continued the meridian all the way down to a place called Isla Dragonera. And I found it very interesting that the base of the Paris Meridian was a site named for the mother goddess. And it perhaps symbolizes the idea of the kundalini at the base of that meridian, just as the human energy system has. And there are sites along the meridian. So Cardedeu, the root of the name is Cardo, meaning north-south meridian. And up here we have Cardo, a mountain, which is based on the word cardo as well. So we have an ancient idea of a meridian before the meridian was measured, which was in 1600s. We have many legends in the Pyrenees that speak about dragons. A lot of these legends come from the Basque people, but all across the Pyrenees, from the east to the west, they speak about various dragons as creator beings, and one of them is Benzozia, a great mother goddess who breathed fire periodically, and her breath carried the magma from the deep earth and would relate to the volcanic sites in the Pyrenees. And they say that with the movements and the turning of her body, she created these great mountains, which were actually geologically pushed up by the Eurasian and Iberian plates. So here we have an image. I'm going to jump ahead and tell you a bit about the great cross landscape temple that I found, and then we'll progress throughout the different sites that I discovered that mark the ends of the landscape cross. At the end of each arm, you see the dolmen symbol. And I discovered that each of these sites had multiple dozens of megalithic sites, mainly dolmens, but often menhirs, stone circles, engraved stones. So there was apparently a great plan in place with this cross long before many of the later sites were established. So they're dating the megaliths in this area around 3,500, 4,000 BC. So there has been this landscape cross in place for at least that long. My sense is that it's much older and that it was placed, here we have the Pyrenees, so on either side of the Pyrenees, to create an area of balance and harmony for the great migrations that would come in the future. So it was perhaps placed eons ago. So I decided I needed to make a trip to the Paris Observatory, and I met with one of the head astronomers there that was researching exoplanets, and he gave me a tour of the Cassini room and the grounds. Now here we see the Cassini room with there, you don't see it here, but there's a gnomon at the top above the door, the window, and then the light shines right down a model of the Paris Meridian. Here's the Pyrenees. So it shines down, and you can see triangulations that they used in their measurements. Now, what they were doing is measuring the star movement, the sun's movement across the land, and using prominent mountains as markers. Sometimes church towers were used. What I found was really interesting. Oh, and one more thing about this Cassini room. On either side of the meridian model, there are the 12 zodiac signs in mosaics. So the sun, as it moves down the meridian, marks particular zodiac signs, marking time and space. What I found interesting is that the astronomers happened to mention that when they established the observatory with the purpose of finding this longitudinal line, they established an altar to a dark mother goddess, the Lady of the Underground, in the crypt below the observatory. And having a black Madonna at the Paris Observatory on the Meridian really struck me as important, because this sets up a theme for the entire Meridian. And what I would discover is that it was a dragon line because of all of the dragon depictions along the way. So here's a close-up of the triangulations that they used based on the stars to measure the meridian, to make it accurate. And they discovered in the process that they were able to measure the speed of sound and light, and also the qualities of gravity. So it wasn't just marking a single line on the landscape. It was working with the stars, working with time, light, sound. And here's a recent discovery from the Gaia spacecraft of what they say may, this cosmic serpent in the Milky Way that reaches 9,000 light years, which we can't even imagine that kind of length, may have birthed our Milky Way galaxy. Now that's extraordinary because so many ancient cultures around the world speak about a cosmic serpent, a cosmic dragon creator energy that gave birth to our reality. We find this in the Americas in the serpent form. It's a giant petroglyph in Utah, marking a light dagger at the summer solstice sunrise. Have the great serpent marking time and light. We find it in the Pyrenees at the western end of the Camino, or the Way of the Stars, a place called Altamira. 36,000 BC or so. Incredible. cosmic serpent. And all the way down the meridian, as I progressed from Paris southward, I found representations of the serpents and dragons. The outer images, caduceus and these windy serpentine pillars, or at a temple or a church called San Lazare or Saint Lazarus, John. And John is always depicted, or usually has a cup or chalice with a dragon. In this case, it's a winged green dragon in Troyes Cathedral. Further down the meridian, we find John again in a beautiful church in his name in Catalonia with the Grail cup and a golden dragon. And it looks as if he's friendly with it. He's not trying to destroy it or slay the dragon, right? He's actually honoring it and having a communication with that dragon. And Philip Gardner and Gary Osborne said in The Serpent Grail, both the Holy Grail and the elixir of life were originally linked to the serpent and dragon, symbolizing resurrection, rebirth, immortality, enlightenment, and wisdom. And here we have a lovely representation. He's about 2 meters long. His name is Drac, which is simply meaning dragon in Catalan. And he's in the Pyrenees, marking the meridian and breathing fire and smoke and roaring throughout the valley 3 times a day. I mean, I doubt if this artist really was thinking about that this was a dragon line meridian, but nevertheless, he placed it there for the children. I loved it. And further down, we find at Montserrat 8 fire-breathing dragons of Our Lady, Black Madonna. So in speaking about a serpentine or dragon line, later sites were created in honor of Mary Magdalene, hermitages, sanctuaries, monasteries, humble abodes, hermitages, in the name of Maria Magdalena. And often they're guarded by sites of the Knights Templar. And we see down this meridian, I call it the Magdalene Meridian, a Magdalena gate right at the foot of Mount Canigó, the sacred mountain of the Eastern Pyrenees, a magnificent site, and a Magdalena gate that was established many, many centuries ago. Did they have in mind that it's on the meridian? I don't know. Who named it? I'm not sure, but nevertheless, it's a Magdalene gate. Dragon of Pi here, Mount Canigó, the dragon Drac that we just saw, the House of Bees, Magdalena of Pereira, which we will discover is very, very important. Magdalena Mountains, a whole range of mountains right on the meridian. Magdalena sites all the way down. And I want to point out on the eastern coast of Iberia and right on the border with Gaul here, we have the end of the Pyrenees at a place called Cap de Creus, or Cape of the Cross. So the cross theme began to reveal itself to me. There were clues in the names. This promontory that is the easternmost point of Iberia used to be called the promontory of Aphrodite. And they created an Aphrodite Venus temple here. There were Artemis temples here, Isis temple, Asclepion, Serapis, Artemis was up here. I mean, more than I had room to really list on these little maps. So it was all filled with goddess temples on the coast of Iberia. And as we go further south, there are more. So going down to Mallorca, where the measured meridian ends, of course it continues across the planet, but as it was measured, ending at Dragonera here, we find a Magdalena mountain with a Magdalena hermitage and a major Magdalena monastery in Palma. Dragon caves here, and many megaliths. But Menorca, I'm using the English version of the spelling, basically minor and major ka. Ka most likely related to navigation to and from the islands, and Canis major and Canis minor. So let's go to Menorca because it has more megalithic sites than any of the Balearic Islands. And why? Why would that be? Also, sites named Ophiusa, Formentera's old name, the island just south of Ibiza, was called Ophiusa, named for the Ophite serpent healing medicine traditions, the mystery traditions that came out of the Eastern Mediterranean and into Iberia. Menorca, only a tiny island about 30 miles long, has more archaeological sites than all of the other Balearic Islands, more than 1,500. The Pyrenean fault line that was caused by the pushing together of the Great Plates continues to Menorca, which says that this energy that is available where they placed all of the megalithic sites across the southern base of the Pyrenees, which we'll go into more. We're following that fault line energy, which creates an opening to the inner earth, creates an opening and an increase of energy. Some of you live near there and know this. So there were also high levels of quartz, or there are, quartz and iron that create magnetic anomalies and can have the effect of opening places or portals into other dimensions. And so Menorca is filled with this, and we find numerous what are called taulas, these T-shaped pillars, similar to what we find in Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe. So one of the sites, Torre de Engaumes, is a very interesting site. This is one of 11 enclosures that are like small versions of what we find in Turkey. And the Istanbul University professor, Mehmet Özdogan, I'm not sure how to say that, said that the people from Göbekli migrated westward, eventually bringing their culture to Spain circa 3000 to 2500 BC. Now, this was a progression that was over time, so most likely they established their sites in various places across the Mediterranean until they got westward to Menorca. And the tau shape, taula simply means table in Catalan. The tau or T-shape can be a symbol of the tree of life, growth, fertility, creative force, the power and potency of the earth. Interestingly, T-shapes also mark ancient migration paths, and we find this in the American Southwest and South America. The Hopis say that they marked their migration path, or their paths, because they migrated at different times, from South America up through Central America into Arizona, New Mexico, with the T-shaped windows and doors. Here's another image of the same site to give you a sense of the size of these sites. Now, what's interesting about this particular site, Torre de Engaumes, is that they discovered a series of Egyptian artifacts on the north side of the main T-pillar. And it was the T-pillar that faced exactly north-south. They found an Imhotep bronze sculpture, figurine rather, and some implements of libation preparation, medicinal. So Imhotep was well known not only as a priest architect, but a great mystical teacher and a master of medicine. So they were able to identify that the origin of this Imhotep figurine was, in fact, Egypt. So they were bringing all of these traditions into Iberia very early. Then I had a dream. Now, a lot of this journey that I'm sharing with you was guided by several very profound dreams. Some of them were epic, some were very simple messages. And in this particular one, I was simply told that I needed to light 4 sacred fires. I wasn't given any information of where. I was just told this was important for my journey and for the region, somewhere in the Pyrenees area. And I want to tell you a little bit about this image as well. This image was designed by Rupert Soskin, who unfortunately wasn't able to come, but he works with Standing with Stones. Many of you know his work. And he's my neighbor in France, so he designs a lot of the album covers for the music I do. And in this one, we have the goddess, the Celtic princess Pyrenean, and the root of her name is fire. She works with fire, and in here, well, the legend says that she gave birth to a serpent. So, of course, the interpretation by male historians and writers was that she gave birth to a very dark energy. No, no, no. She gave birth to wisdom and power. So here she is breathing fire with her voice, the creative fire. And this creative fire is very interesting, well, very important in the whole serpent-dragon traditions. They were often associated with the creative word, the creative sound. We have the 7 Dizan dragons of Tibetan tradition that breathed the 7 vowels that created everything. In the Egyptian tradition, we have the 7 cobras that gave birth to the power and potency of life. And on the top here, we have a tradition that is very popular in the Pyrenees of lighting sacred fires on St. John's Eve or the midsummer solstice. So the first fire location that I was guided to, and this really entailed doing connections with the sites, prayer, music at every site, and asking for sounds and songs at each site, and then lighting a small candle or some sort of fire. And in this first site, Creu de Encobertea simply means covered cross in Catalan. Again, another clue to the importance of a cross that would be making itself known. And I want to show you just a few close by sites that are near Compostela because they're important. This site is called Masbaleta, and it's at Cantalopes, Catalonia, just north of Compostela and the Cap de Creus. I was just there at winter solstice. At sunset, this menhir in the center of the right-hand circle is illuminated. And it's surrounded by many dolmens and other menhirs that mark various times of the year, mainly the solstices, and winter solstice seems to be really an important alignment in this region. Another one of my favorite dolmens is Lit de la Generala, and it means simply the bed of the female general. Now, who was this female general, and who was she leading? That's a whole book in itself. I want to show you the inside of the dolmen, because I was there also at winter solstice, and this male upward chevron is illuminated by the sun at sunset, highlighting the chevron. Now, right next to it is a caduceus. You see that? So that could have been, at the same time that the dolmen was erected, but most likely later, because the Greeks came into that area carrying these Ophite traditions and the traditions from the Isle of Rhodes, etc. So this light insemination, the light entering the dolmen, the female bed, the female womb, and this impregnating for the next cycle, ensuring the fertility of the region. And even closer to Compostela is this fascinating Cave of the Foxes that was inhabited 15,000 BC. Now, these were hunter-gatherer people. But this crack is very interesting because it could have been associated with an entry into the other dimensions. We find places like that all over the southwest of the US, where the tiny fissures are places where they could enter into other dimensions or travel through the earth, travel to other locations. So, Compostela. I've been there dozens and dozens of times. Every time I go back, I learn something new. And I'm often there at the winter solstice, mainly because, well, it's an important moment in time, turning point. But also, there are no tourists around. It's quiet, it's peaceful, it's not too hot. And I've been capturing these various light effects, and this is in the northeastern corner of the dolmen. So more of a female chevron, or a bird of light, and a sun dagger to the left. And as the sun was setting, they progressed to move closer and closer to 7 cup marks that are down here, shaped like an upward chevron. And ultimately, pointing right at the 7th cup mark. What does that symbolize? We can put all kinds of interpretations on that. Did the cup marks represent star alignments? Or did it represent the male energy? Certainly. Or did it also represent the human energy system? It's your guess. But they placed this perfectly to mark the 7th cup mark. And at the end of the day, the sun was setting the very last rays, and it looked as if the dragon was imbibing and eating the sun, which in fact, to my mind, happens in these sites, that there is a receiving of the light to impregnate the earth and then spread that fertility throughout the region. And it almost looks like he's going to have a glass of red wine, vino rosso, at the end of the day. There are several aspects of this dolmen that are very, very interesting. So at the time it was erected, it's aligned north-south perfectly. And the back wall, back here, of the dolmen has a very small cup mark engraved, which they call an umbilical. And you find it on a few of the megalithic sites and on some Armenian churches and various places. These umbilicals mark an alignment, often to the north. So at the time it was erected, it was aligned to Thuban, or Alpha Draconis, in Draco, the dragon. And we kind of highlighted this idea of an umbilical cord connecting the dolmen with the star. So I went in there shortly after the solstice with a small harp with the intention of aligning with that northern pole star, which of course has shifted by now, but the northern axis. And I listened as I went in to the dolmen and began to play a particular note, which is the note, or in the chord, E, B. So here we have the circle of fifths, and I was playing these two tones, which makes a perfect harmony, the perfect fifth. It's one of the basic sacred harmonies used in ancient music. So it became a song to the light keeper, the dolmen, and here's the umbilical. And I had placed in it an amulet of Saint Benedict that I had been wearing. Not surprisingly, it has an equal arm cross, right? And the center reads in Latin, "Let not the dragon be my guide." And I immediately, in my mind, erased the "not" to make all these discoveries. So on that very same day, the very same hour that I was in the dolmen, making a conscious alignment to the northern axis and the pole star, and I saw this in my hotel room when I pulled up the space weather website. It was extraordinary. On that very afternoon, the scientist at the Polar Light Center recorded a rare, pure sine wave in a B tone, in an infrasound. It was very, very, no, actually it was a very high frequency that I had to keep lowering harmonic, or octave by octave until it got into the range of being able to recognize what tone it was. So it was a B tone. And the duration of the frequency of this tone was sustained for more than 2 hours through the atmosphere and across the earth. He said it was very, very unusual. So the scientist and I both felt that there was some sort of co-creation going on. And this is something that the ancient people worked with extensively. It's nothing new. In the Algonquian traditional song, "We are the stars which sing. We sing with your light. We are the birds of fire. We fly across the heavens. Our light is a star which sings." So the whole cosmos is singing and ringing. We just have to attune ourselves to hear it. All right, so we're about to progress to the fire number 2 site. I'm going to start moving a little more quickly because I want to fit all this in. Before we progress there, I want to show you a couple of places right below Coberteia here. So here we have the Cap de Creus, the Cape of the Cross, the dolmen of the covered cross. And right below that, just a mile away, was where they established the ancient city of Rhodes, now called Roses. And it was the migrations from the Isle of Rhodes that they believe created this Greek city. This is the later medieval area that you're looking at, and actually the Hill of Mary here with the Basilica of Mary. Which Mary is unknown, but Magdalena was honored all over that area. In fact, some of the earliest churches dedicated to her are in this region, dated to about 370 current era. And just 9 miles to the south, we have the Greek city established by the Phocians in the area now in Turkey, called Empúries. And both Rhodes and Empúries were the great trade cities of the past. They had extensive temples. Let's see if I can show you some. So here we're looking at the Greek city ruins and then later the Roman ruins up here. So this is a simplified map of a few of the temples. We have the Temple of Artemis, Isis and Serapis, Asclepius Hygeia, and a magnificent flower of life right in the area above the old Greek city. So this Ouroboros is representing the guardian of Empúries, was called Agathodemon, and it was this temple, this serpentine deity that brought all good things to the people, and they all paid homage to this serpent deity. In fact, in the Isis temple, there were many offerings, little amulets and little figurines of serpents they found on the site. We have Magdalena, chapel from 370, current era, Santa Margarita, who was birthed from a dragon. Again, the wisdom traditions. Okay, the site of the southern fire at Cardedeu. Cardedeu is just northeast of Barcelona, and it's exactly on the meridian, and this cross was established before they actually measured the meridian this far south, so I found that interesting. Cardedeu, in Latin, you could translate it as the meridian of God. And Cardea was a well-known Greco-Roman goddess, goddess of the hinge, of directions, the cardinal directions, and her starry castle was at the northern stars. But after I lit the fire at Cardedea, I discovered a megalithic route just to the south, 1 mile, and very interesting sites named Scorpion Stone, Pierce Stone, Stone of Swallows, etc., the ant dolmens. And I want to honor the great Jean-Michel. He said, every stone and wood was placed in the landscape in accordance with a magical system. Mathematics and music were expressed in the geometry of the earth's surface. And here we find a magic forest, and instead of writing it in the Spanish or Catalan, they wrote it in English for whatever reason. So let's see a couple of these places. The dragon on the right is representing a great spiny ridge that runs to the east of the dolmens. Pedra de Cruces is the stone of the crosses. Again, we have the equal arm crosses engraved in the area. Find it in the names of the sites, engraved at each end of the equal arm cross. There's another one detail of the same stone. Fulcanelli, the alchemist, said, and this sign, the cross or the X, has been called the seal of Hermes, seal of the wise. So these ancient traditions from the Eastern Mediterranean came in very early to Iberia. And here's the place where I lit the first fire in this megalithic route, called Domaine de Selex, and it was on a lunar eclipse. And my friend Danny and I did the balancing of the white tiger and the green dragon for the dragon line on this eclipse, on the dragon line. It's a very interesting site nearby in the same complex, the Stone of Swallows. And it has a series of women painted red and red serpents. And I found that very interesting because there is a tradition in another area of the world, in South America, of women painting themselves with red ochre on the eclipses. The shaman, Sho'on, and this comes from the Selknam Society, the southern tip, Patagonia, southern tip of South America. The shaman, Sho'on, knew from his dreams when the moon would eclipse, the women painted their bodies with red clay, their faces with bands of white clay from the nose to the ears, while they beat the ground and chanted to appease the fury of the moon. Where are the women who sang like canaries? There were many women. Where are they now? So going to the third fire site, rather, at Cardo, the mountain on the Meridian, right above the village of Rennes-les-Bains, which is near Rennes-le-Château, which is more well known. And I added some of the various goddess temples that we know of from the past. Paris, the Isis temple. There was a Venus and Isis, well, there was a Venus temple and Isis named sites, actually, sanctuaries, right around Cardo at Rennes-les-Bains. We come down and we have the Venus temple and then the Isis Artemis temples that we already saw. And right at Montserrat, we have another Venus temple that was established in the 3rd century BC, I believe. So here is what is called the cromlechs of Vauclux. This is the name that the priest Henri Boudet, the priest of the village from the late 1800s, and he wrote a fantastic book on the true Celtic language, really written in the language of the birds, a coded language that tells the story of the various sites in the region. And this is his idea of the cromlech. Many of the menhir-looking stones are naturally occurring, but many also are actual menhirs that were erected. And here we have sites on the Meridian called Las Soulanes and Cougoulou Levant. So these two circles on the right, it's called Cougoulou Levant, or the elevated Cougoulou site. Whatever he meant, in the book you can find the rest of it's the language of the birds that the priest used. It's quite interesting. Has a lot to do with the fertility and the phallus. So lo and behold, these two circles are carved perfectly with a little passageway hole, and the dimensions are basically the same as Mars to Venus. And the water flows from the male circle into the female circle. And the stones around this site are marked with equal arm crosses. And here we are approaching for a runic ritual at the site. Very, very magical place, right directly on the meridian. So here is an image of Henry Lincoln's pentagram put into the landscape here, and you can see Cougoulou Levant is right at the eastern point of his pentagram. Las Soulanes, the solar temple, it has two huge menhirs that are actually natural. facing directly north-south. Fantastic. I sometimes think it's even more incredible when they're naturally occurring, falling into that perfection. And then Rennes-le-Château, Magdalene's church here, and this alignment. Now, on that same alignment, we have a place called the throne or seat of Isis. It used to be called the devil's armchair, but we're changing those things. And I used to think that the throne of Isis was an arbitrary name, but it aligns right through Cugelou Levant, the fertility site, right to the point of Sirius rising on the horizon, eastern horizon. And this is an image of the throne that has been worked and embellished over the centuries. A very ancient mother goddess site, Celtic druid site, with a red spring right next to the throne. So we have the red and the white waters also in the south. We have a site called Avalon in France. We have red and white waters that run through this valley, fed by springs. So to the fourth site, I'm going to move a little more quickly now. So the fourth fire lighting site was in the west. I discovered a very remote chapel that had this amazing equal arm cross painting that is now in the Barcelona Museum of Catalan Arts, depicting the four apostles. Then I found an even better fit. Just to the west of this chapel was another series of dolmens, a megalithic route. It's also a dinosaur zone, just like in the Rennes-le-Château area. So we have these ancient images of dragons. And we went to offer our sound. I carried a flute with me. It was too cold for the harp. And my friend Juan Saez brought his flute. But it happened to be the 100-year snowstorm in Iberia. And it was during COVID shutdown. All the borders were closed, but we did it anyway. And there's Juan Saez with his flute, serenading the stones. Now, what we found in doing dowsing as a baseline when we'd arrive at these sites and mark the energy field, they tripled, quadrupled after honoring the stones and sites, giving our love and our songs. The whole journey became a path of songs, a Camino de Canciones. The fifth fireside at the center, a place called Santa Magdalena de Pereira. And from the Serpent Rouge, the enigmatic text purportedly from the Priory of Sion, by measured steps and a sure eye, I can discover the 64 dispersed stones of the perfect cube, or the square, or the cross. The cube is just the dimensional aspect of the square and cross. So why are there 64 shrines dedicated to Mary Magdalene in Catalonia? 64. What is it about that number? So I was serenading the site many times. It's also, the Magdalena chapel here forms the center of the landscape cross. It's also an ancient crossroads of the Way of the Stars running at the base of the Pyrenees, east-west, and various ancient pathways of the Celts, the Greeks, and the Romans. It was a crossing point. And the astronomer Heinz Kaminsky said that at least 4,000 years before Christ, all interregional cultic centers in megalithic times were joined in a great network. There are 3 star routes. The first leads through northern Spain. So this is at the base of the Pyrenees, at the Mediterranean, where we have Nut, the great mother goddess of the Milky Way, above, and the Pyrenees below here, and then the Camino continuing to the Atlantic. So from sea to ocean, she gives birth to the sun and the stars. And the people began their Camino at the eastern end and progressed westward to Santiago or beyond to the end of the earth, Finisterre. There's so much more to tell about this story. So we can see the beginning of the ancient Camino, the Way of the Stars, at the eastern end, where the stars rise, at the ancient Venus Aphrodite temple, or perhaps before, the dolmen would have been the beginning point, and following the megalithic sites westward. At the same site that we had the Venus Aphrodite temple, it was later created as a monastery, Saint-Père de Rhodes, and this is on the Cap de Creus overlooking the Mediterranean. So this is the typical Camino symbol. So the Way of the Stars laid the groundwork. It was the original Camino of the people, later became Christianized. And very interestingly, at the very beginning of the Way of the Stars and the Camino de Compostela, we have a site called the Cape of Orpheus, or Cap de Orfeu in Catalan. What was Orpheus doing here? So the legend says that he was on the ship with Jason and the Argonauts, looking for the Golden Fleece. They thought it was in the Pyrenees somewhere. There's a lot of gold in the Pyrenees. Who knows what it was? But they were shipwrecked. And the story is that Orpheus became so enchanted with the beauty of the coastline that he started playing a song for the Pyrenees. And the rocks moved closer, and he was able to climb on the rocks and be saved. So let's see a little bit more about him. So here is the Cap de Orfeu and the coastline with site called Cerberus, which is the dog of the underworld, the guardian, that was actually part dragon. And Orpheus had charmed Cerberus several times. And look at what the coastline does when you turn it just a little bit. There's a large jowled dog or a lion, a definite creature here. So we have a theme on the eastern end of the Way of the Stars. Venus Aphrodite, who rode her swan, and Orpheus, who was placed in the heavens as the swan of Cygnus, who became a swan as well. This theme of the ascension and the transformation into a swan. Here we have the western end of the Camino, the old Way of the Stars, to the end of the world. So there's a game that is a traditional board game called Juego de la Oca, or Game of the Goose. And it's a board game. The beginning, it says 63 here, but it's really 64, because the first point here is the beginning. The beginning is the 0 point. So there were 64 stages in the Camino. And this board game represented the 64 stages of transformation on the journey of evolution from a goose to a swan. And we find this 64 in so many different interesting places. The I Ching Oracle, the squares on a chessboard, the genetic combinations in the Human Blueprint for Life, 64 churches of Maria Magdalena in Catalonia, 64 questions of Mary in the Pistis Sophia, the book of faith wisdom, and the 64 cycles of Venus in the ancient Mayan and Babylonian calendars, the Babylonian calendar dating to 16th century BC. And so the cycles of Venus, 8 times 8, and every 8 years, Venus forms a beautiful pentagram, 5-pointed petaled star. Do the cycles of Venus mark the rhythms of the footsteps of the initiate on the way of the stars? And the octaves, the 8, of the rhythms of harmony and the soul's ascension as a swan, as above, so below. And as we near the end of the Camino, we find indications of this winged ascension theme with the birdman of Castrinho de Concho in 2000 BC, and the winged serpent at Serpent Rock, just north of Finisterre. The medicine, the ascension, the healing, all of these themes are prevalent in Iberia. And the final, at the end of the earth, the soul's final transformation into a swan. And Salvador Dali's sculpture, this is actually from my collection of images, the heartbreaking open of the swan. Thank you. Thank you.